Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. On today's show, Immigration in the U.S., the future of the Dreamers and the beneficiaries of the TPS with Abel Nuñez, Executive Director of CARECEN. Abel Nuñez, a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
There's definitely something that not necessarily the massive public in the U.S. and especially outside of the U.S. is aware that through the Jeff Sessions, we're talking about the Secretary of Justice is going on regarding asylum. Tell us.
Yes, so beyond all the rhetoric that we're hearing on immigration, the programs being eliminated, and even proposals of new law, the reality is that our new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has a long history of being anti-immigrant and racist and has promoted these policies. Now that he has the power within the Justice Department to control how cases are adjudicated, he is slowly and quietly changing laws of how asylum cases are being adjudicated. So, for example, right now, an asylum case takes between 5 to 7 years to process from when the person submits the application. What he wants to do is to make sure that the last in are the first out. He wants to give numerical goals to adjudicators to make sure that he's processing fast cases, but that only limits the justice that people that are fleeing extreme violent situations have to prove their case. So this is very concerning for us.
And what about the March 5th date that has to do with the Dreamers, with the DACA program? And tell us, what is DACA and what is the situation? How hopeful are you after March 5th?
Yeah, so DACA is a program that protects young people that were brought to this country as young people before the age of 15, and they have grown up and lived here.
Illegally, one document.
Yes, exactly. So they were brought in by their parents. Either they came with their parents when their parents decided to come, or their parents subsequently brought them over through the country without, not in a legal way. And so President Obama created this program to protect them as a temporary measure while the Congress can sort of fix our immigration system. But President Trump, one of his key campaign promises was to eliminate DACA on his first day. He didn't do that. What he said that he was going to take a look at it. But last September, he made a decision that he was going to eliminate it. And
in 6 months.
In 6 months. So March 5th was the deadline where no one else could renew their work permit and their status to be protected in this country. But that has been put on hold because there are several lawsuits against the administration in the way in which he wound down the program. It turned out that when he announced it in September to March 5th, there was so much confusion. There were a lot of young people that weren't unable to renew that. And so actually the Attorney General of California actually sued the Trump administration and right now is held up in court. While in court, the judges, what they said was that people can continue to renew their program. So until the court makes its final decisions, anyone that has TPS and is about to expire, they can still renew so long as the court does not render its final decision.
One of the things that we heard, of the many things that we heard from Donald Trump, he changes his mind quite often, was that eventually he was optimistic about the future of the Dreamers, but if a path to the citizenship could be possible, that was at the expense of building a wall against the border of Mexico.
That is correct. So when one of the things that Trump said that he had a special place for the Dreamers and understood their plight.
On his heart.
Yes. And so, but what he turned it over to Congress. He actually, when he canceled the program, he said that he was giving Congress 6 months to be able to resolve it and give a permanent fix. And that was the entry point of the argument. As the argument went along, he began to demand more and more from the Congress in order to resolve the issue for the DACA recipients. One of the things that he was asking for and continues to ask is the funding for his famous wall on the southern border of the U.S. Then he was also asking for an elimination of what's called the diversity lottery visa. That is a particular program that helps diversify the amount of people that can qualify to enter into the U.S.
Legally.
Legally. It actually, a lot of the applicants to that visa are people from Africa. But he said that creates a danger to the nation, and he was asking for that program to be eliminated. So he was clear what he wanted in exchange for DACA, which was something that was unacceptable to Democrats, and unfortunately it all has collapsed, and at this moment there is no law or bill in Congress that has the ability to pass, and you have an unwilling president to take stronger leadership to make sure that something positive passes for these young people.
We have heard also that recently Jeff Sessions was suing the state of California because of the sanctuary cities.
Correct. So there's a lot of cities, and I want to clarify that a sanctuary, when a municipality claims to be a sanctuary, there is no legal claim to that. It really, a sanctuary city is really the accumulation of all the policies that make life easier, not just for people that may be undocumented, but really for everyone. It's the access to services to the city of people living within that. One of the things that they do specifically to protect immigrants is that they do not honor retainers. And a retainer is a request from ICE, from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to hold someone while they can send an agent to pick them up. The municipalities basically stipulate if a person has not committed a crime in our municipality, then we will not honor that retainer and we will let that person go. And so Sessions, our Attorney General, is saying that that's a violation of immigration law or the prosecution of immigration law, which is the realm of the federal government. So he's suing California because they just passed a law that prohibits those types of things, among other things that really are not, have anything to do with for ICE to not enter California. For example, ICE as a federal agency can enter any state that they want whenever they want. It is just the cooperation that the state is willing to give ICE, which has been limited by California.
We have heard that regarding deportations, there are a lot of irregularities.
Yes, what we see is compared to last year, the arrests are up. So one of the things that Trump did promise was that he was going to allow the law enforcement and the force of immigration, ICE, to do its job in the best way they saw fit. So there are no limitations of who they can arrest, when they can arrest, or where they can arrest. So what we're seeing is an increase of people being arrested when they are not here legally. But that is different than deportation. So we need to clarify that being arrested by ICE does not automatically mean being put on a plane and sent to your country of origin. You get sent to a detention center, and then you have the ability to still fight your deportation, and it could be several months and sometimes years before you're actually deported back to your country.
Some of those deportations, some of those detention centers are private?
Well, yeah. There is one company that manages multiple detention centers, and these are profit enterprises that they need bodies because they get paid per person in a detention center. And so what you're really seeing is the privatization of our enforcement and detention system. And when you put a profit incentive, when you're dealing with a government process, you can see that there's ample space for abuse, ample space for the violation of individuals' rights as they're being detained.
And they are the case because repeatedly we hear that some of those immigrants that are in the detention centers report that the conditions are being, in the case, almost torture.
Yeah, and I think this is intentional because one of the things that the administration wants to do is that people that are placed in detention and eventually deported back to their country of origin tell such a horrific story of the process that no one else will want to come to the U.S. I think this is faulty logic, given that a lot of people are not coming to the U.S., but they're fleeing from conditions in the country of origin. And so they will continue to come trying to protect their life and their family.
Talking about immigration, I'm talking about DACA, I'm talking about TPS. What do you think that is going to be the role of these issues in the coming midterm elections in November?
I think they're going to play a small role. The reality is that I think that this administration, particularly Trump, has given ample ammunition for the Democrats to use to retake the House. For example, you see the issues of race and the situations that happen in Charlottesville. Black Lives Matter, the gun violence that we're seeing. So there are a lot of issues. So this president, I have to say, is creating a coalition against them. There are people that have never worked together that are now so angered by his policies that are willing to take a step. We have seen an increase of women that are running for office at the local level. I think that there is a renewed energy within the opposing party, the Democrats, and hopefully if they put in place an appropriate strategy, they may be able to take, if not both, at least one of the houses. But that is yet to be seen. We still have a long way before that. There's still a lot of politics to be done. But I think that civil society is standing up, fighting back to make sure that people's rights are respected.
In a recent show in that television program, 60 Minutes, one of the reports was about the immigrants coming to the U.S. in trucks and they are dying on the way. And if you were watching the way that is presented, the issue, it seems that because they interview some quote-unquote experts for them, that problems inside our Latin American countries, for example, Central America and Mexico, and they're mentioning violence, they're mentioning pandillas, never ever appears that the U.S. has to do with the creation of the conditions. And for example, in that program, Jason Owen, that is the deputy chief of the Laredo checkpoint, he's saying that the border is in the hands of narco-traffickers.
Well, I think you have to be clear. In order for extreme policies to be approved, you need to justify it. So one of the strategies of this administration is to make sure that immigrants are not seen as assets to this nation, but that they're seen as a danger, whether they are traffickers, drug traffickers, whether they are gang members. They are people that are coming to harm this nation. That's not really what the reality is. When you look at the narco traffickers in Mexico that have incredible power and are incredibly violent, they exist only for one reason, and it is because the U.S. is the #1 consumer of illicit drugs. And that market generates an incredible amount of revenue that gives them the power that they have. When you look at Central America and the gangs, those gangs were not created in El Salvador, Honduras, or Guatemala. They were created in our own backyard in Los Angeles in the 80s. And those were people that were fleeing violence because the U.S. supported the wars in Central America. You know, in El Salvador specifically, $1 million a day for 12 years in military aid. Those had consequences of a flow of immigrants that landed in LA. They learned the behaviors, illicit behaviors of the gangs, and then when they were caught up in the criminal system and then deported back to El Salvador, Honduras, or Guatemala, they replicated those same behaviors. And the governments were not ready for that type of civil disorder, and they gained strength. And unfortunately, they are the ones now that are setting the next flow of immigrants into the U.S. So it's a circle that the U.S. have a hand in making sure that it continues to happen because of their foreign policy to the countries of origin and their domestic policies and how they receive it.
And the media here, the mass media, is complicit?
Yes, they are, because unfortunately, I think for two reasons. One, the U.S. has what we call manifest destiny, and that is their belief that they are the best country, that their destiny is to be the best nation on this earth. And that taints every part of our society, whether that's the press, whether that's the politics, whether that's the average person living in the U.S. They feel that they can do no wrong. And unfortunately, they don't understand that there's a lot of policies that the U.S. has implemented in Latin America that have caused devastation, lack of economic development, and conditions in the country of origins that force people to leave. So it's not that people are necessarily coming to the U.S. to live the American dream, it's that they're fleeing their own hell or their own nightmare, which was created by the U.S. And given that in the U.S., immigration is seen as a domestic issue without any context of the foreign policy that has been implemented, you can see how they can miss the boat. And it's easily manipulated. And so you see the press doing stories about the gangs that are coming in, the violence that the narco traffickers, but they don't really then dig deeper to see what role the U.S. had in playing in creating all of those mechanisms, all of those illicit players.
Many experts denounce also that the U.S. is supporting candidates in Latin America, presidential candidates, that most definitely are in the agenda of the U.S. in terms of quote-unquote free trade, and, for example, ruling for the rich and exporting the poor to the north. Is that the case, and is it different from the denunciations that Russia supposedly were interfering, meddling with the elections in the U.S.?
I would actually take it a step further. Besides just supporting elite governments that help trade or the interests of the U.S., they have actually meddled in our elections historically. Whether South America, Central America, Mexico, the Caribbean, they have always been part of that. So it's very interesting that they would be so offended that Russia meddled in the last U.S. elections. And most politicians from the left, from the right, could not believe the audacity of a country meddling in the U.S. elections. Very hypocritical, because they do the exact same thing in all of Latin America and the Caribbean and probably other parts of the world. So the reality here is that the U.S. has created the conditions that we are living right now, creates a politic condition in the U.S. where a candidate like Trump surfaces up and they don't want to own any responsibility for it. I think it is clear right now that immigration will continue to be a mechanism for these nations to survive, for those people to provide for their families. The U.S. needs to adapt to that reality and create policies that, instead of blocking them, brings them in, because they come to strengthen the U.S.
No immigration reform at sight?
Unfortunately, not in the short term. Given the current politics of the day, with the Democrats and the Republicans at each other's throat and having our current president, I do think that there are possibilities probably in the mid and long term.
Let's talk about the beneficiaries of the status of temporary protection, TPS. We're talking about, in terms of numbers, how many people are around?
Well, totally. TPS was started in 1990, and it's a humanitarian program that allows the executive to provide protection whenever there's a man-made disaster or a natural disaster in the countries of origin. So currently there are about 10 nations being protected, the largest group from Central America. Total, there are about close to 400,000 people that are protected under TPS. The largest group are Salvadorans, about 192. Next are Hondurans, about 60,000, and then Haitians, another 50,000.
And what is going to happen to them?
Unfortunately, they are the victims of the current policy. We need to be clear that this administration wants to limit all means of legal migration and irregular migration to the U.S. This program is under the authority of the executive, and unfortunately they see it as a mechanism for people to stay in this country, and they have eliminated all but one, which is actually two, South Sudan, but there's only like 75 people of South Sudan, and Syria. But given the conditions in those countries, I don't think that they could have stopped it, but they have now eliminated TPS for all other nations.
We're talking, for example, the large numbers of around 200,000 people from El Salvador that supposedly the authorization to stay in the country ends by September of 2019. What is going to happen in terms of El Salvador could be ready to absorb, theoretically, 200,000 people going back to their homeland?
Well, this is the reality. El Salvador can receive them, but they don't have the ability to reintegrate them or reinsert them back into society. Most people, when they lose the TPS protection, they will not leave the U.S. They will only leave when forced, meaning they are going to have to be caught by immigration police and be put in deportation process. The reality is that the countries have not developed themselves in a way that people can go back and live safe and productive lives.
And also there's an economic issue, which is all the money that they're sending to their own countries.
Correct. Just for example, El Salvador had a 2% growth rate, economic growth rate. 1.5 was due to remittances. So that means that the country in and of itself can only produce 0.5 growth. Without the remittances, you will see a collapse in those nations. So it is important for that program to continue. But unfortunately, this administration doesn't see it that way. And the impact is not just going to be in the country of origin, but it's going to be here. TPS beneficiaries, over 40% have homes, they have businesses. There's over 200,000 citizen children that were born in this country. And so economies and local communities here in the U.S. are also going to be impacted.
So is this the white supremacy taking over the control, the Tea Party in the Congress? What's going on? Because this is an incredible change for people who have lived here in this country for many, many years. They haven't seen something like that ever.
Yeah, I think that it is. It is truly an ideology of white supremacy. Unfortunately, even if we were to give the benefit of the doubt to the president that he is not a white supremacist, he definitely has hired people around him that truly are and are implementing a strategy to limit migration and to ensure that people of color do not become a majority in this country.
We have seen, we were sort of surprised when we hear at the beginning of this week that again, someone else left the White House team, when we're talking Rex Tillerson, that was considered a moderate within the team, the advisor team of President Trump, replaced by Mike Pompeo, CIA director. Reaction?
I mean, I think that it's concerning because you have someone that may be more reactionary to the policies as it relates to other countries. This is the position that leads our diplomacy around the world. This is who report to the president on actions they should take to ensure the safety of this earth. This country has nuclear weapons, and they have to deal with other countries that have nuclear weapons. And I think that we need to have people that are of sound mind, that are moderate, can see both sides. And what we see is a president that only cares about himself and his ego. And anyone that challenges him that finds a very short stance in the administration and is seeing the door pretty quickly. In the last year, we've seen a number of people
like 20
that have left the administration. And even in the State Department, beyond the secretary and the subsecretary, there is over 100 positions that have not been filled. And those are the positions that are needed to ensure that this country has the best information to make the best decisions as we relate to our partners and our enemies around the world.
Finally, what your organization is doing around all that situation of immigration?
Well, there's two main things that we're doing. One is that we're providing or increasing our capacity to provide legal counsel to individuals. Once people lose their collective protection, they really have to make sure that they understand what their individual case is and what, if any, means of adjustment they may have. So it's an ability of doing just consultations to people. But second, we're joining with other efforts to make sure that we can pass laws and policies that will ensure a permanent solution to TPS, to DACA, and really to all immigrants that are here in this country.
Abel Nuñez, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.